A programming note. The following podcast contains discussions of sexual violence. It may not be suitable for all audiences. Do you ever get that creepy feeling when you're out walking by yourself and you think that someone may be following you? Or what about those sticky situations at parties and social gatherings when someone is giving you attention that you just don't want? Do you know what to do? Or, heaven forbid, what do you do if someone grabs you or attacks you? Today, we're going to talk about self-defense. And good news, you don't have to be a black belt, and you don't have to be big, strong, or even young to fend off an attack. You just need tools. On today's Spot the Line podcast, we're going to mine Lauren Roselle's 30 years of experience in training women in simple and effective self-defense. Hopefully, you'll never need it, but if you listen to this podcast, you'll have a great start in protecting your personal safety. Join us. I'm Joelle Castex. I'm the Chief Content Officer here at Spot the Line. I'm an author, a speaker, and have spent the past 20 years fighting for survivors of child sexual assault and institutional cover-up. Survivors like me, but who don't have a voice or aren't ready. I'm here today with my co-host, Lauren Roselle, a sexual harassment and assault prevention expert with 30 years experience offering trainings in self-defense and sexual harassment prevention to teens and adults. She also happens to be one of the co-founders of Spot the Line. Hey, Lauren.
Hi, Joelle.
So today I want to talk about self-defense and self-defense trainings. And I'll admit, I'm Cleopatra. I'm the queen of denial when it comes to the importance of knowing what to do in a threatening situation. And I think it's because I've decided to live a life that is free of fear. And my professional focus has been on the danger that the people you love and trust impose on your life. And while my fear-free life has been great for my self-growth, I think it's a little foolhardy. And since I've gotten to know you and hear your stories, I've been overwhelmed by the value that self-defense training can bring to anyone. And then 2 stories came to light in the past couple of weeks that told me that having a show focusing on self-defense is vital. And the first came from our friends at the TSA. Earlier this month, they announced that they were going to again start offering self-defense trainings to flight attendants and pilots due to what the New York Times called a surge in cases of unruly passengers and violent behavior on flights. And before COVID, I used to fly a lot, easily 200,000 air miles a year. And while I never saw any violent behavior, I was on flights where tension was really high. And in that small space, I mean, what do you do if someone becomes violent? And right now, I have no clue. And then as I was pondering that issue, another story closer to home came to light. A woman in the town next over from me, Huntington Beach, because I live in the slums of Newport, was abducted off of the street by 2 men and dragged into their car where they sexually assaulted her. Mm-hmm. And it was so bad she passed out. And they pushed her out of the vehicle when she woke up, and someone saw her and called the police. And she was out walking at midnight, but that's not an unreasonable time to be walking in downtown Huntington Beach because there are restaurants and bars and all kinds of places and people that are open and out and about. So I thought, that could have been me, if I actually had a life and went out and did things. But no matter how strong I think I am, I couldn't overpower 2 dudes. So this is where you come in, and I want you to talk about the whats, the whys, and the hows of self-defense training. But before you tell me how you got here, I want you to describe yourself physically. Are you a tall, strong, imposing figure who works out all the time with a black belt in martial arts?
Well, that's a great opening question, Joelle, because it is something that I talk about in my classes as far as what my background is. I am 5'2". I am now 58 years old. I'm not a svelte gal, and I don't work out regularly, although I do play pickleball. Gotta love that. And I have never had a formal martial arts class in my life. And I like to tell my students that. You would think, wow, that's taking away from your credibility there, isn't it? But it's actually the opposite. I have had training. I did 60 hours of training to become a self-defense instructor, really focused on kind of an women's empowerment based courses. And I want my students to know that I don't have something extra that I can't give to them. Right? They don't have to continue on and spend years in a martial art. And I'm not dissing the martial arts. I think it's fabulous on so many levels, and I love it when I have students who come from the different martial arts. But what we're talking about here is something that you can learn to master fairly quickly and will get you out of a bad situation. And it's not just about the physical techniques, though we will talk about those on this podcast, and I will kind of walk people through some of them. But it's also about how you carry yourself, setting verbal boundaries, noticing what's going on around you. All of that is a part of self-defense.
So talk to me about how you got into this work.
Well, I volunteered on the Los Angeles Rape and Battering Hotline. So I took a training to become a peer counselor and went on that. I had like the Wednesday night overnight shift for about a year and a half. And I had one particular call. I'm going to say that all the people that called, and it was mostly women who were calling, they would tell their story, and I would see these moments in the story where it could have gone differently. And I listened to this one particular story, and what happened in her situation was she was going into her underground parking garage beneath her apartment complex where she parked her car, gated, and she's getting out of her car. She goes to the elevator to go up to her apartment. And the elevator doors open up, and there's a guy that she's never seen before, and he's standing in the elevator. And she immediately gets, this is my big technical term I use in self-defense, she gets the creepy feeling. Something's not right. And for a lot of women, we get it in our stomach. Something kind of like twists a little bit, right? Sometimes it's the hair on the back of your neck rises up. But she had that feeling that something wasn't right. But she was more concerned she felt bad about feeling bad about this stranger. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. She was like, I don't want to think badly of my fellow human. And so rather than listening to that instinct and not getting in the elevator, she stepped into the elevator and he sexually assaulted her in the elevator. So she's raped in the elevator. And I want people to take a moment to think about that. She knew prior to getting into that enclosed space that something wasn't right. And she was more concerned about that stranger's feelings than her own safety. And I thought, there's something wrong here if this is the way that we're being socialized. And I need to reach people, and especially women, before they're in a situation that would have them calling a hotline. So that's when I was like, I don't want to do intervention. I want to do prevention. And that's what gave me that spark to go, I'm going to become an instructor. I'm going to do this. And I went on staff at the LA Commission on Assaults Against Women, who now is called Peace Over Violence. And I ran their self-defense program. I coordinated that for about a year and a half, 2 years, until really I was just spending too much time behind a desk coordinating and scheduling. And really what I wanted to do was teach. So that's when I started my business.
So tell me about your business. Tell me what you do, where you do your outreach, and what kind of people you're training.
We will train just about anybody, but I would say the majority of our business is with a lot of schools, middle schools and high schools and colleges, because they're already together. They already have their group, right? And it's very easy. You've got a new crew coming in every year. And once we're in a school, we pretty much are always in that school because they see how important this kind of training is, particularly for girls. But we also have boys trainings because, of course, we can't just be teaching girls and women to defend themselves forever. We have to be educating boys and men on what those boundaries look like and the difference between flirtation and harassment and all of that, right? So we do those kinds of trainings, and we do them in corporations as well, companies, law firms, literally anywhere we can get a group together. And we do things ranging from a 1-hour personal safety seminar to an assertiveness training for women. We do self-defense courses that can range anywhere from 3 hours to 15 hours, depending on what people want to do. We really tailor the programs to meet the groups. My very favorite, and I'm excited I have one coming up, my very favorite class to do is mother-daughter trainings. I love teaching moms with their teen daughters because in that setting, of course, the moms are thrilled to be seeing their daughters get these skills and know that they're going to be safer in the world. But no one ever thinks about the flip side of that these teen girls are seeing their mothers in a different light. They're role modeling right there in front of them. The most important woman in their life is now being powerful and, being able to really take care of themselves. So it's an amazing dynamic.
That's really cool. Now, so these are the people who are at your classes.
Mm-hmm.
And talk to me a little bit about the resistance that you get from people. Because, I mean, I'm one of those people. It's like, oh, yeah, I should take self-defense, but, it's on my list.
Yeah, the classic is, oh, yeah, I'll do that someday. That sounds like a good idea. And there is a lot of resistance because a lot of people don't really want to admit that it could be them. Right? We want to say, well, that's going to be someone who's younger than me, or that's going to be someone who lives in a neighborhood that's not quite as, nice as my neighborhood. And there's no telling who it's going to be. You cannot picture. I mean, you can, if you look statistically, yes, there is a peak when in that kind of 18 to 24-year-olds, but that mostly is because of college. Right? Because there's so many assaults on college campuses. But really, women all the way up into their 70s and 80s are assaulted because sexual assault is not about attraction, right? So when women say, oh, no one would ever attack me because I'm overweight or I look like this or whatever their issue is, it's like, no, it's not about that, because rape is about power and control. So they want to pick someone that they can feel powerful over, right? That's what they're looking for in their ideal target. And so that could be any of us, depending on, how we're carrying ourselves in the world and what kind of boundaries we're willing to set, which is why such a big part of my program is about the verbal skills and being able to identify, okay, this doesn't feel right. Maybe this person's standing a little close and I just need to say to them, hey, you need to take a couple steps back. And that's not yelling at them. That's just setting a clear boundary. And when you do that, that told them something about you. Oh, she's willing to actually name something that made her uncomfortable. She's willing to say that. She's probably not a good target for me to physically attack. So some of the listeners, you have done something as basic as that, and you have avoided being targeted. One of the scenarios that I do in my classes is, you're walking down the street. Let's say you have a 5-minute walk to get to your destination. And as you're walking, you realize there's someone behind you and you think they're following you. And this could be a man or a woman, but oftentimes I'll use male pronouns because that's statistically most likely, right? So you've got this guy behind you and you've got that creepy feeling in your stomach and you're on the back of your neck. It's happening. You have that feeling. What do you do? Right? And I just asked that open question. So we didn't plan this ahead of time, Joelle. What do you think you would do? You have a 5-minute walk ahead of you and you think someone's following you. What are your options?
Well, I would just keep going and hold my head high and not look like a target. But yeah.
Okay. So you got part of it there, that not looking like a target I like. But what would tell this person that he's really picked the wrong one? What's something you could do that would be a little bit more proactive?
Turning around and facing him if he got too close.
Yes. So great. That is a wonderful response. And we have other responses. Let's say he's not all that close, but you're feeling like, you know what, it's just him and me, and this doesn't feel good. What happens if you cross the street to test? Does this person cross too? If they don't, you can feel a little bit more comfortable. Hey, he's on the other side of the street. This feels okay, right? If he does cross, you're like, oh, that's confirmation that I'm in a bad situation. I might have to do something a little bit more powerful, but at least now I know, right? There's also going into a store, right? If you're in any kind of a business district, just walking right into a business and going, and don't just go in and loiter, because I'll have a lot of teen girls in my classes go, yeah, that's what I do. I just go into a store, and I said, what do you do when you get in there? I just wait for the guy to move on. And I said, no, you want to go up to that counter and you want to say, hey, I just stepped into your store because I'm a little freaked out. I think this guy was following me and this is what he looked like. Because, you're not the only potential target in that neighborhood, and they should be kind of on alert and be aware. So getting into a store could be it. Could be that you just go to a group of people. Oh, I see this group of people over here. I'm just going to walk right into them and say, hey, I just need to stand here for a second. I think this guy's following me. I'm a little freaked out. Are they going to reject you? No, they're gonna be like, oh, of course, hang out with us, stand here, absolutely. Which guy is it? Let's, and you're doing things to prevent, it's called target denial. You remove yourself from the situation, and now sometimes that's not possible, and that's when we want to really confront the guy, which is what you just said, Joelle. You might do, but when we turn around, we don't want to ask a question. I have so many students in my class, if we don't prep it ahead of time, and I tell them, okay, you got someone coming up behind you, what are you going to turn around and say? And they'll say something, and in a really assertive or angry voice, they'll say, what do you want?
Yeah, why are you following me? That's
Yeah,
what I was thinking. I'm like,
on?
oh, all my answers are wrong.
Right. Like, do you want the answer? Are you wanting
No,
to have a
no.
back and forth conversation with this person? And this is an interesting thing. I mean, I have my master's in interpersonal communication, and I really focused on gender and communication because I was already doing self-defense when I went back to get my master's. And one of the things that shows up in the research is that girls and women tend to ask more questions in every kind of scenario in life than boys and men do. And so that means in social situations, in work situations, in school, in every situation. And in most cases, that's fine and dandy, right? That's not a problem. But in a potentially dangerous situation, to have that be our go-to can be very problematic. Because if we are socialized to ask a question, the second part of that is pausing to wait for the answer. So if I turn around and say, what do you want? And that person continues to walk towards me as they are answering whatever they're saying, it's not a really clear message what's going on. If I say, what do you want? And they're like, well, I just wanted the time of day. And by the time they get the word day out, they've grabbed my arm.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't.
It's an invitation when you ask them a question, really.
Yeah. So one of the first things I teach my students, and I want your listeners to hear, is that you want to tell the person what you want them to do. Just turn around and say, stop, or back off, or get away. Now, you don't want it to be a really long thing, right? You don't want to turn around and say, hey, you, what I really need you to do is get away from me. Like, that's too long.
Yeah.
You want to be to the point, but you want to tell the person what you want them to do. Then if they don't do it, 100%, oh, this is really happening. I've got it. I might have to do something physical, but the majority of the time, and I want you to hear this, Joelle, because this is so powerful. The majority of the time, our words are enough. When we set a clear boundary and we say it like we mean it, and we make eye contact, and maybe we get our hands up in front of our face to say stop, like our body language and our facial expression, everything's congruent. That's when we usually don't have to get into a physical altercation. And that's the beauty of self-defense, is the more you know, and the more you're using these other techniques, the less likely you are to actually have to use a physical one. Go ahead.
Oh, so it struck me because it's very similar to, I've been a trail runner for years and a hiker. That happens when you see a bear, you don't run away, and you certainly don't ask the bear a question.
Right, or you get big.
Yeah, or with the mountain lion, you get big, or sometimes with a bear, you crawl up in a ball if you carry bear spray or whatever. But it's like, you don't ask the bear, hey, why are you following me? Because you know why the bear is following you. Because you're a tasty meal, and it's right before hibernation season. So there's also a huge congruency there.
Sure. And a lot of times I'll have, I would say 99% of my classes, someone will ask the question, well, what if he was just an innocent person and he was in a hurry, and I just, turned around and started yelling at him? And I say, great question, because we all have that fear that we're just going to be paranoid and yell at the wrong person, which I don't think is going to happen, but I do understand it. So what if it was that? What if you turned around and this guy hadn't even seen you, let alone was targeting you, because he was like looking at his phone, and he was late for a meeting, and he was walking really fast, and then you turn around and say, hey, back off, what happens next? Is this guy wounded? Is he hurt? No. The worst case scenario is that he thinks you're a little nuts, right? Like, I don't know that woman, and she just yelled at me and whatever, right? Nothing bad happened. But if you err in the other direction, and you keep walking, and you say, he's not following me, this isn't really happening, no way this is happening, then where that ends up could be a really bad place. So we want to always err on the side of your safety, not somebody else's feelings. And the reality is, their feelings are not even engaged in this. They don't.
I know. They have no emotional attachment. Their feelings aren't going to be hurt.
That's right.
They might say, oh, I'm sorry, lady.
Yeah.
weirdo, and then keep
Yeah,
walking.
exactly. And again, I don't think I'm sending my students out there to be constantly turning around and yelling, back off, get away, 911, that's not happening. It goes against our socialization to yell at a stranger, right? We have to
Yeah.
really feel that creepy feeling to overcome that and turn around and yell. And I just want to encourage people to be willing to use your voice to protect yourself, even if you're not 100% sure. But I hear back from my students very often. I rarely hear back that they had to actually physically fight back, which is great. But I hear back a lot from people who have been in a situation where they're being followed or someone was harassing them at a party, and they set the boundary, they said the no, they said the back off, and then it was over. And that's a success story.
So I'm going to ask you a question about one of the situations you brought up, and then we'll take a quick break. But tell me, you said someone at a party. So do these self-defense strategies work at in social situations as well?
Yes, absolutely. So let's say that that you're at a party, so some of the people, but you don't know all the people, and you have someone who, I have a whole list of party safety tips, right, that I give to particularly to high school students and college students. But it works across the board. But you're leaving the party, and then someone catches your arm and says, "Oh, don't leave yet. I didn't get a chance to meet you," and suddenly your spidey sense is going off like this, something's not right. Right? Why is this person coming after me now that I've actually walked out of the house? What would you say to that person? Right? And sometimes we get stuck thinking, oh, I don't want to be rude. Right? This is the big thing of being nice and polite, kind of overwhelming everything else. Like we have to. But if in a real situation, you get to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable giving you that information. I need to go now. You need to go back inside the party. Like that's self-defense.
Huh. Yeah, because it's been a long time since I've been young and single and at a party. But I get it. I've been in those situations, and normally it's I'm gonna hide. I'm gonna just slip out of here. He's not gonna notice, kind of thing.
Right.
It's taking the passive way out as opposed to an assertive way out.
Well,
And
after the break, I want to do it. I'll talk through a scenario that's very common for women, and I'll see what you might do in that situation.
great. So when we come back, we're going to talk about some scenarios that women will face that will require some self-defense training, and some of the most common situations that Lauren's classes address. All right, we'll be right back.
All of us here at Spot the Line are dedicated to a world where everyone is safe from all forms of sexual violence, including harassment, assault, and child sexual abuse. We create apps and unique technology to help people spot the line to prevent sexual misconduct in all its forms. Our first two intervention and prevention tools, the Sexual Harassment Meter and the Predatory Grooming Meter, will be released later this year.
Hey, welcome back. So we just finished a great discussion on the whys of self-defense training, how Lauren got into this, and how she is not the poster child for Ms. Bodybuilding America. So, so she is a person who,
I'm every woman.
Yeah, it makes it all the more credible. So you were gonna when we took the break, you were about to get into a story about the common scenarios. So why don't you just dive right in?
Sure. So I want you to picture yourself at a party, and this, regardless of sexual orientation, it's not about your sexual interest in this person or you're not. It's just about the fact that there's a friendly guy who's sitting next to you. You're having a nice conversation. You don't have a creepy feeling. Okay. This is not, oh my gosh, I have to get out of this. It's horrible. It's just, everything's going fine. You know people at the party. You've been introduced to this person. They're sitting next to you. And at some point in the conversation, and what I'm setting up here is that you're not comfortable with it, he puts his hand on your knee. Just like a friendly little hand on the knee. And what do you think most women do in that situation when they're not comfortable?
Just tolerate it.
Yes. So that's a very common response. The number one response, if you can picture this, like let's just say you had your legs crossed, and then he put his hand right there on your knee. the most common response is to recross your legs the other way.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because then you're sort of pushing the hand off by the fact that you've adjusted your legs, right? And we do that. Why do we do that? Because it's subtle. We're trying not to draw attention. We don't want to make this person feel bad. It's not that they're a horrible person. They just kind of they did something too soon, or that they should never have done, and we don't really want to deal with it, right? Well, unfortunately, research shows that men pick up on fewer nonverbal cues than women do.
We don't need research for that. I don't mean to be rude, but we don't need research.
Yes. So what we thought was kind of like, we would get that if someone did that to us. They not necessarily did they get that. Now some guys would, and that'd be great, but some guys don't. And we want to move away from that passive response. And the second most likely response is actually a relatively passive move as well. And that is the hand goes on the knee, and then you say something like, oh, I'm a little thirsty. I'm gonna go get something to drink. And then you make the excuse to get up and walk away, and you don't come back. Now, you might think, well, okay, hey, problem solved. The hand's not on the knee anymore. But my problem with that is that where's your energy and focus the rest of the party, right? You're like, where's that guy? And that was weird. Now I have to watch out for interactions with him. I don't want that to be your party experience, right? And that guy learned nothing, right? He's sitting there waiting for you to come back. He has no idea why you didn't come back.
Yeah.
Right. So we have to educate people on how to treat us. And we do that education one-on-one. That's how it happens. So those are both pretty passive responses. Now, an aggressive response would be on the, complete other end of the spectrum. And I don't think that would be necessary either. Right. Someone puts their hand on your knee. You don't want to be like, hey, get your friggin' hand off my knee. That's
yeah. I in my late 20s, after I was divorced from my first husband, it became a "do you mind" kind of thing, because it's just like, I didn't care anymore. No, I don't care about hurting your feelings. Just stop. What are you doing?
Yeah. But there is a middle ground, and that's where I focus my trainings, and that is that word assertiveness, right? And I think there's a lot of people that get confused about what it means to be assertive, and I think particularly teen girls and women have a tough time with this, because when we're being assertive, to us, sometimes it feels like we're being aggressive.
Or we're being prickly, or we're being, it's always seen as a negative.
Right. So my definition of assertiveness is respectfully educating others on how to treat you. That's all it is.
Ooh, I
you're
like
just,
that.
You're just.
Can you say that again?
So respectfully teaching others on how to treat you.
I
right?
like that.
We're really showing them what's okay and what's not okay with us. So in this situation, hand on the knee, we just turn and say, hey, you know what? I was enjoying our conversation, but I'm really not okay with the hand on the knee. And what is that guy going to do? If he's a good guy, which we're assuming most guys are, he's going to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. And he's going to take it off, and we're going to move through. We're going to move on to with the conversation. It doesn't have to be this frozen, awkward moment, right? One of the guys that I work with says, I think sometimes that it's only going to be as awkward as you make it. Like, you don't make it awkward. You just say your thing and you move on, right? And if he doesn't do that, if he gives you any kind of blowback, like, hey, well, it feels good to me. Why are you being so uptight? Oh, we just learned something about him, didn't we? We learned that he's not respecting me as a person. He doesn't really care about my feelings. He just has his own agenda. But either way, when you have an assertive response to a situation, when you set a boundary, you will learn about the other person and their intentions and who they are. And that's great information. So in the first instance, we learned, hey, good guy, made a mistake. That's cool. We move forward. He respects me. He apologized, all of that. The second guy, we go, oh, we're done with him. He no longer, gets any of my time because he's not respectful and he doesn't care about my feelings. Makes sense?
Yeah. And there's a second variable here too, because there's alcohol many times, or drugs, or whatever. So a guy who's a normally really nice guy who would never put his hand on your knee might put his hand on your knee or your back or the back of your neck or whatever. Right. And if you just point out that you don't like it, he's like, oh God, I can't believe it. I've been drinking too much. I'm sorry.
Exactly. But we have to have that step of letting them know what's okay and what's not okay. And that's something that a lot of women have a hard time with, again, because we've been brought up to be worried about, being nice and polite above all else. And I'm not saying this is impolite, right? This is being really clear. And so we spend time in a self-defense class talking about those situations, even though it's not about physically fighting back, because those are the beginning steps. If there is someone, what if there is a guy at that party or in a situation where they are testing you? We call it the interview. They're interviewing to see, are you a good target? Right? So that could be with an assailant, that could be his first test. What does she do when I put my arm around her? What does she do when I sit too close? If she just sort of kind of edges away and doesn't say anything, oh, this might be a good target, right?
Well, and this isn't a logical process for the aggressor. I mean, they don't sit down with a checklist. This is just, I mean, this is muscle memory on their part.
That's right.
Really.
That's
Yeah.
right. They're seeing what's going to be the easiest route. Most assailants, especially if we're talking about a sexual predator, they're looking for the person they can easily overpower and control. They don't want to fight for control. You know, when women say, I'm afraid to fight back because I'm afraid it's just going to make him angrier.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about that if you're fighting back effectively. If you're striking to vital areas, he has no time for anger. And the kind of self-defense I teach, it is street fighting. It is short and sweet, and you're in and you're out. It's not like in the movies where it's some long, drawn-out fight. It's really about hitting a target and getting the heck out of there. And if you're doing that, he doesn't have time to get angry about it. He's just in pain. These are not supermen, right? I mean, if I had your listeners just take a moment right now, and I said there are 5 vital areas on a man's body where he cannot build muscle, no matter how strong and built up he is and how buff he is. They could probably name all 5 of them, but usually definitely at least 3, right? So it's the eyes, nose, throat, groin, and knees. And that was from top to bottom, right? And I have the students, we say it together, and I have them point on their body because we're trying to create those memories of like, so in a real situation, what do I have and what can I reach? Literally, that's the question you would ask. So the number one way that women are attacked physically is a one-armed grab.
Which is probably what happened to this woman in Huntington Beach. So yeah. I'm glad you're talking about this. So keep going.
Yeah. So and I don't know the details of that story, but yes, it sounds like one or more people jumped out of a van and grabbed her. And I'm also going to guess that if there were more than one assailant, that only one of them actually physically handled her.
Yeah.
Van, because that's also very common. So you have a one-armed grab. Well, if you haven't had any training and you get grabbed in that moment and you feel the muscle, who's got bigger muscle?
Okay. So describe what the one-armed grab is.
So it's just literally they take probably their dominant hand and they grab your arm like right above the wrist, right? As they pull you, right? And so we feel that pull and we feel that muscle and we realize, oh my gosh, they have bigger muscle than me. So that if you pull away, who's going to win that tug of war? He is, right?
Yeah.
Men have more upper body strength on the whole. So if that's all we've seen in TV or movies or in our minds is someone being grabbed and then there's a tug of war and the woman loses, then that's what we do. And that's what we think is the ultimate, that's the result we're going to have. But if we know, hey, you know what? Yeah, he just grabbed my dominant arm, but I have another arm and I have 2 legs. So it's what do I have? Not what I don't have. I don't focus on that one arm I don't have. I focus on the 3 limbs that I still have that I could use. And then I ask, what can I reach with one of those? And again, if we take a pause right now and you just think with no self-defense training ever, Joelle, I've told you about these targets. You've just lost your dominant arm, but you have everything else. What might you go for?
Well, you'd almost roll in and go for the eyeballs or the groin.
Yes. Literally, we did not talk about this before.
No.
So if you only had one hand available, take the fingers in your hand and your thumb and put them together like a duck beak, right? Like you're pinching them all together, right? And now I want you to poke that into your other palm to feel the pressure that you just created.
Oh, that's pretty gnarly.
That's pretty good. So if that were going into someone's eye, it's not going to be a knockout blow all by itself. I'll admit that you're hitting one eye, but it's what we call a can opener move. You strike somebody in the eye like that and it causes pain and they're like shocked and they're surprised and they may very well let go of that other arm because you did that. Right? So striking in the eye can be a great opening move. And really you're creating that better opening, which is the other move that you just said, which was to go to the groin. And I want I want the listeners to think about this. I know that everybody knows, guys know that we know that the groin is a vulnerable target. So if they know that we know, aren't they going to be protecting it? Aren't they going to be wearing protective gear, like, like an athletic cup or whatever?
No.
And the reason they're not is because they didn't think that you were going to fight back effectively. They didn't think you were going to do anything. If they thought you were a fighter, they're not picking you, which goes back to that earlier scenario. We were talking about turning around and saying, back off. You're showing, hey, I'm not afraid to get angry and loud and make a scene, right? Because that scene making is really important, because you're drawing attention to what's going on for other people. If you're not afraid to do that, you're probably not afraid to fight. And so in this situation, maybe you didn't get a chance to do all of that. And so now they physically grabbed you. They don't think you're a fighter. So they're not going to be protecting their groin. They're going to stand there with their legs wide open because they're trying to hold on to another person. So they're going to be grounded and have their legs apart for balance. And there is the opening. And I want to be specific with everyone to understand, when you go to strike the groin, we call it knee to the groin. It's actually not your kneecap. It's your quad. It's the top.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's the top of your thigh. So the weird part about fighting back, and there's a lot of things to overcome. I don't want to dismiss this. The techniques are really simple. They're easy to master, but the bigger leap for a lot of people, especially girls and women, is overcoming a resistance to fighting at all, right? We just don't want to hurt someone. We haven't thought about it that way. So if you're one of those people that's thinking, I don't know if I could go there. I don't know if I could tap into my anger. I want you to do what I do in some of my classes. If I have someone who's resistant to sort of really digging into this and fighting with all their might, I ask them to picture a child that they are close to. So this might, if it's an adult class, it might be the person's actual child, right? Or with teens, I might say it's your younger sibling or a niece or a cousin or, whatever. And I say, picture that child. And then they got it. I said, okay, now you're the only thing between that child and this assailant. They're coming for that child. Let me see that fight. And then they just demolish my guy. By the way, I have guys who are all padded up and can take all these hits without getting hurt, right? But the difference in their intensity increases, multiple times, because now they're protecting someone more vulnerable than themselves.
Yeah.
And I want us to always think, but we have to protect ourselves in order to be there for anyone else. And that same amount of rage that you had for that child possibly being hurt, you want to have that for you. And then you're going to be okay.
So while this is all going on, are you screaming? Are you yelling?
Yes. Thank you for asking that question. So going back to that knee to the groin. So we're going to strike the groin with our quad, and we're not going to strike the front. So to be specific, our target is not the penis, it's the testicles, because that is the real vulnerability. Men can get a very minor strike to the testicles and you will see them drop to the ground. And there's no defense to that. There's no guy that's like going to be, oh, I'm super resilient and I can handle it. No, they can't. That's why in kind of fights, when you do the professional fighting, there's like no hitting below the belt, right? Well, because whoever hits below the belt first wins. That's just how it goes, right? Well, we're going to be the one. And this is also why women can actually be successful in fighting people who are much larger than them. It's not about size. I want to say that again. Size doesn't matter. It's really that fighting spirit and focusing on targets. Right.
Well, it's not about strength, and it's not about fitness, and it's not about any of those things.
No, it's not. It's going for a target that's vulnerable and then getting the heck out of there. And if it's just tapping into that fighting spirit, and that, when I say that, some people, I don't know, may not understand what I mean by that. It's really turning your fear, which we're all going to have. I'm going to have it if I'm being targeted, right? That's going to happen. But we're going to turn that fear into anger. How dare you make me feel afraid as I'm walking down the street? right? And we tap into that anger and we focus it out in action and power. So it's not just like flailing anger all over the place. We're really focusing it into specific techniques. So how do we get those techniques? Well, yes, you want to create muscle memory. You want to take a self-defense class. But even if people who are listening don't get to be in a self-defense class, I want them to see that you coming in, stepping closer to your assailant in order to hurt him. That's the big thing to overcome, right? Because of course we want to shy away, we want to back away, we want to create distance. But if we're going to fight, that element of surprise is on our side. So if they come and grab us, they think we're going to pull away. And you might have that instinct to pull away. And then you realize, oh, that's not working. What do I have and what can I reach? Oh, my legs, my super strong legs that I'm walking around on all day long. Yes, I can step in, knee that person in the groin, and down they go. And I've got my hand free and I'm running to safety. And yes, I'm yelling 911 or I'm yelling, I've been attacked, and you could describe the guy. Of course, you want to get this person off the street. But number one is to get to safety. And most students in my classes land a knockout blow in the first 3 seconds.
Really?
Yes. Now we extend it because we want them to have the experience of being able to hit more targets and have that extended fight. But yeah, they're grabbed and they just go, what do I have? What can I reach? And it's an automatic response after a while, right? Because you just like with anything else, if you hadn't, Joelle, I don't know when's the last time you were on a bicycle, but let's just say you hadn't ridden a bike in 5 or 6 years. And I said, get on that bicycle. Would you be able to ride it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's muscle memory, right? You're not going to think, oh, I got to tilt to the right. Oh, I got to hang. No, your body remembers how to do it, even though there was a time when you were little that you didn't know how to do it. But then you got it. That's the same thing with self-defense. It's the same thing with anything physical. Once you have had repetition of a movement, that movement will be there for you, because you're not going to really be in the same headspace in a real situation that you are in a class, right? You don't know what's coming. It was unexpected. You never know what that other person's going to do. And that reminds me also to say, I have a lot of students say to me, but what if they do this? Or what are they going to do next? Or, oh my gosh, I'm worried about what's going to happen next. I want you to switch that around and don't worry about what that other person's going to do next. What do you have control over? What you're going to do next? What am I going to do? And if you can get into that mindset of what am I going to do, then you're going to take some moves that are going to get you out of that situation, because you're not panicking, thinking about what's their agenda.
Okay, so we're going to take a break here. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you a few more questions about how to practice these moves. And then I want to talk a little bit about the TSA issue and other more common scenarios that our listeners might face that would require self-defense training. All right, so we'll be right back. Hey, it's Joelle. Our kids don't come with a manual that explains how to keep them safer from child sexual abuse and exploitation. But what if you could make your child a hard target for predators? My book, The WellArmored Child, gives caregivers easy-to-read and age-specific tools to help take the fear out of parenting. Take advantage of my 20 years experience in helping survivors of child sexual abuse. The WellArmored Child is available on Amazon or through my website, castex.com. That's CASTEIX.com. Welcome back. So Lauren and I are having an excellent discussion about self-defense and what people can do and how to create turn situations around where you are being attacked. And so you were talking about the things, the switching the situation from, what's the assailant going to do next, to what am I going to do next? What are my strengths? How can I take control of the situation? And I guess my next question is, how do you practice these moves if you're not in a self-defense class?
Well, there are some videos that you can go to on YouTube where you can be watching, some basic techniques and then doing them. We call it air drilling, right?
Okay.
So you're sort of doing it in the air. You don't have a partner there that you're doing it with. You don't have a padded assailant who's, coming up and grabbing you that you get to hit full force. Though I do recommend, whether it's my training or anyone else that's doing that type, that is the most powerful kind of training you can do, because it creates that adrenaline rush that would be identical to what it would be like in real life.
Well, and it also gives you permission to actually act out.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It is that overcoming of the, teaching. I know this is going to probably be unbelievable to you, Joelle, but teaching the physical moves is actually relatively easy. People can get them fairly quickly. It's that willingness to actually use them.
Yeah.
Right? It's the verbal, it's with the women's classes, it's actually more challenging to get them to set those verbal boundaries, because if I'm teaching you, Joelle, if you've never done a knee to the groin, right? You've never learned that physical move. And then I teach you how to do it. It's really easy to teach you how to do it because you haven't been doing it wrong for years, right?
I don't have any bad habits.
Yeah, you don't.
People in the groin.
But when we're talking about how we communicate with potential predators, or someone who's just making us feel uncomfortable, we have, decades of being kind of passive, or trying to be subtle about it, or not saying anything, or trying to avoid, where we're not being assertive in our communication style. And so that's an unlearning, right? Okay, you know what? Instead of saying, could you please remove your hand? Don't ask a question. You don't want to give them the option of saying no, right? We don't want to ask the question. So instead of just saying, hey, I need you to remove your hand, that's a new skill. That's like overcoming something that we've been doing differently. So that part's more challenging, interestingly enough, than actually the physical. But it's important for everyone to have the physical technique, because if you're at the gas station pumping gas and some guy comes up to you, and by the way, I use this scenario in my class for years. This is one of my role plays that I do to kind of demonstrate, being assertive verbally, and getting your body language matching that, and getting the person to walk away. And then it happened to me last year. The scenario that I've been playing out in class actually happened. I'm at the gas station, I'm pumping gas, and some guy comes up to the car and he starts asking me for money. Now, my point here is not that you never give anyone money, but that if you have a bad feeling, you have that creepy feeling, that overrides everything else. You don't listen to someone's story. You don't get pulled in by their words. You just set a boundary.
Well, and you're so vulnerable at the gas station because, your car's right there, but you're not in the car. Maybe your keys are in the car.
Right.
And yeah, I'm always like on hyper alert at the gas station, because we do have a big problem with, homeless people coming up and drug addicts trying to, bum money off of you.
Right. So here I am in the scenario that I've been teaching for years, right? So it was automatic. I just turned, faced the person and said, you need to move away from my car. I can't help you today. Go find someone else. And so that's a redirect, right? I'm not just saying no, I'm now telling you what to do.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll often say, no, thanks, or no, and then we leave it there, and then they're like, maybe I can work her a little bit longer, maybe I can get her to acquiesce, and we just be really clear with your no, I can't help you, you need to move away from my car. So I'm telling him the thing I want him to do, and he did it immediately. Because really, if he just wants money and I'm saying no, it's not worth his time to stick around. And
there's someone else. I mean, he's not paid by the hour. He's on commission.
Yeah. And if it was his ploy to get close enough to me to attack me, that he wasn't really about asking for money, then I've also let him know I'm not that person, because I put my hands up in front of me and I said, no, you're too close. You need to step back. You need to get away from my car. That also told him, oh, wrong one. And again, we get worried about like, oh, was I mean to someone? Again, it's not that I've never given money to someone. I have, but I've done it in a safe way, right? I put my safety first, and I'm a very friendly person. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. I'll talk to anybody, but I won't talk to you if I've got that bad feeling. If you ask me, I don't owe you the time of day, right? If I've got a bad feeling about you.
Well, and that's a great story, because we are so trained as women to be nice and polite and accommodating and nurturing. Mm-hmm. And we had a situation here. I live in a condominium complex. We have a community pool, and we also have a big homeless drug addict problem, and not in the complex, with them coming into the complex. And there've been a few times at the pool where we will have strung out druggies trying to use the facilities and stuff like that. And one time we were there and all the kids are there and there's this guy and he's obviously high and he's like, oh yeah, I'm waiting for my friend. He lives here. And one of my really good friends who's a neighbor was like, well, I think you need to leave. And this is private property. And she had every good intention of keeping everybody safe. But the guy was like, yeah, whatever, lady. I have a friend coming. My friend lives here. I'm just going to sit here for a while. And I just went up and said, it's time for you to leave. Go. You don't live here. Get out. We will escort you all the way out. And he got up and left. And they were so astonished that I would just be that aggressive. And I'm like, well, I really wasn't being aggressive. He doesn't live here. It wasn't like he was a neighbor. I was just assertive. I was doing what a dude would do and no one would think twice.
That's right. And the way you described how she said it, she was saying statements, but she was saying them like a question.
Yeah.
Right. And kind of that uplift at the end where we're like, well, you really need to leave.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
And you didn't do that. And you also, in that situation, another strength there would have been the power in numbers, right? So that if she was not successful, and let's say that, there wasn't someone like you there, but what if there's 4 or 5 people and they all go up together and say, no, you really need to leave now. Suddenly, oh, maybe that one person wasn't enough, but multiple people, they're going to acquiesce.
Well, then that leads us to my next question. So we have the TSA issue. So I used to fly a lot and I never saw any of the crazy violent behavior. However, there were those times where the tensions were high and tempers were ready to flare. I mean, what do you do in the situation where someone gets violent on an airplane? I mean, do you have things or aggressive or whatever? I mean, are there tips and tricks?
Well, it is a challenge because you're in an enclosed space, so no one can go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
But you would have to think about, first of all, I'm not ever advocating that everyone just dive in, right? Like, oh, there's some kind of physical altercation. I'm just going to jump in too. If you're not trained to do so, don't do that. Right. But even when you start to call attention, you said, I've noticed tensions escalating.
Yeah.
So that might be the moment to verbally intervene. Right. If you're seeing, if there's something that, voices are being raised, because usually there is something that happens before the physical.
Yeah. The precursor.
Right. So you've got that time where you're hearing the voices escalate, or you're seeing posture change, body language is getting aggressive. And that's when, as a bystander, we could say, hey, let's take a moment. Let's back off and draw attention to the fact that other people now are hearing and seeing you, right? As the perpetrator, or the person who's about to get violent. And we're all noticing, and you're not alone, and it's not just you and this other person anymore. So sometimes, not always, but sometimes that can be enough when they realize, oh, I don't have everybody on my side here. They're not just being quiet bystanders pretending like this is too awkward, so we're not going to notice it's happening. Because that's what people count on sometimes, is that we're just going to be too embarrassed to address what's happening.
But that's the initial response. I mean, I'm thinking, God, if it happened when I was on a plane, I'd probably hide.
Well, and honestly, if you don't have the skill set to intervene in any kind of successful way, you would want to stay out of the fray, right? That's why I'm saying I wouldn't want everybody who's listening to this podcast to be suddenly like, yes, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to save the day. No, because you could make it worse, right?
Yeah.
You do. You don't, for example, if there's been no physical contact yet, you don't want to be making physical contact with this person, right? If you see someone getting up and moving, you're not going to grab them by the arm to pull them back, because what are they going to do to that?
No, they're going to strike out at you.
Yes, exactly. So you've escalated the situation by trying to do something to, to hold someone back or to keep someone away from someone else. So you want to use your words for that. Hey, stop, get away, stop, get back in your seat. And everybody's saying, get back in your seat, right? That could be effective. And let's say it's farther along than that. Let's say that you didn't see anything until now there is actually a physical altercation, right? So you look around, you figure out who can help, like who's frozen, who's in frozen fear, and who's ready to jump up and take action, right? And you figure out maybe who those people are, and you go. Because if you go together and now you pull him away from that person, you're not one person pulling him off, you're multiple people pulling him off, or her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now you've overpowered that person with numbers. You get someone in between the perpetrator and their target, right? So that he can't get to them again. And you're just using very calming words, calm down. It's okay. Let's stop. Let's take a moment. Let's breathe. Come, like, and again, even if this person is like just out of their mind, because whether they got drunk, or they're just, in a rage, or maybe there's a mental illness involved. We don't know all these variables, but you're not trying to escalate. You're trying to de-escalate, even though it was a physical altercation.
Well, it's the tone of your voice too that is intriguing me, because how many times have we seen someone say, now, sir, get back in your seat. It's okay. And I think that just stokes the fire sometimes. Whereas if someone went, hey, sit down, get back in your seat, calm down, it's okay, I'd be like, okay.
Yeah, it's you're kind of taking command.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that, part of the training they're getting is to be able to verbally take control, and say it like you mean it. Because really, we react to words very powerfully, but we react to how they're said more than the actual words. Right. So, I use this, I joke with some of my students for them to say, who are you going to be more freaked out by? The person who turns around and says, hey, stop. Or the person who turns around and says, Merry Christmas. Right.
I like that.
Freaked out by that. I mean, obviously you're not going to say Merry Christmas, but I'm saying it's really about the way you say them, and people will respond to that. It's the tone, it's the pitch, it's the volume, it's the eye contact that goes along with it. You say it like you mean it, and people will respond that way. When they're trying to keep someone calm by saying, hey, you need to get in your seat. I understand where that's coming from, right? Trying to keep it calm, keep it quiet, keep it low, because that's also trying to not draw attention.
Yeah.
And I want you to draw attention, because maybe people 10 seats back didn't know there was something happening until they heard your voice. And maybe they are someone who has some skills that could be put to use in this situation, but they're not aware. So when you're drawing attention, when you make a scene with your voice, when you're loud with your voice, you're drawing attention to bring people to the situation.
Well, and this is even a parenting skill, because when you think about it, the parents were like, now, little Johnny, we don't do that, do we? I was never that parent. I was, no, stop. And my finger would be, no.
Yes.
You don't do that. He was always really well-centered. So
yeah, I use the analogy with my students. I say, it's like you're giving a command to a dog.
Yeah.
Right. You don't say, hey, stop now. Right.
Yeah.
You say, stop, down. Right. And that is the kind of command you want to have. Now, where does that come from? If that's, if you haven't had a lifetime of practicing being assertive and setting those kind of boundaries, well, if you take a self-defense course and you learn what your body can do for you, that your body's on your side, that you have strengths that you maybe didn't realize you had, that you know how to target other people's weaknesses, you physically know how to protect yourself. How much easier is it for you to set a verbal boundary now? Because if you're at that gas station and you say to that guy, hey, you need to step away from my car.
You can back it up.
You have it. You have something to back it up. And that comes across. And so what happens is you don't have to back it up. They just go. Right. And if they don't, worst case scenario, okay, well, this is what I trained for. This is why I know some self-defense. And everybody of every age should have some self-defense. And I don't say that just because that's my career and it's what I love to do, but I say it because it's going to build a confidence in you. My whole point in training is for people to walk through the world with less fear and more confidence. And I know you started this podcast saying, I don't live in fear. I'm a confident person. And taking a self-defense class doesn't negate that. It doesn't say, oh, I'm taking this because I'm afraid of what's going to happen, even though that could be a valid reason to take a class as well. But it could be because I'm a proactive person and I want to be there not just for me, but for other people. What if I had a situation? I was teaching a class, and during a class, there was a woman being assaulted outside in the parking lot. And I came outside of the class and was able to intervene. I didn't have to physically take him away from her. I just, my presence and my saying, telling her to come with me and do you need some help? And you want me to call the police? That was enough to stop that physical attack. She was on the ground. He was kicking her in the torso. Right. And the irony is that I was actually teaching a self-defense class 100 feet away in a building. But me knowing that I could physically protect myself made it a lot easier for me to go and help someone else.
Well, and it was that story when you told that to me the first time that really was the hook that got me, because I realized that I just don't have those tools. Mm-hmm. Or I didn't have them. And so if I saw something like that happening, would I be the person who would just quietly call 911? And for years was told, don't intervene. So that I realized at that moment, it's like, I need tools, and what self-defense classes provide are tools.
That's right. They give you options so that you can make safe choices or safer choices, right? It's never a perfectly great situation if you're having to physically fight someone. That's not ideal. We all admit that. But if you know where to strike, it is going to be a very short fight, very short. And you're going to be running to safety. And that person hopefully is disabled enough that they're still there when the police get there.
So we're going to wrap this up. But before we do, I know that, I want to take a self-defense class. The world is opening up after COVID. Where does someone go to find a good self-defense class?
Well, of course, I'm going to direct you to my website first, esteemcommunication.org, right? We offer classes to pretty much everyone. There are some great other programs out there. If you have kids that you want to get involved that are like elementary school age kids, a wonderful program called Kid Power. If you do a search for them, they have chapters all over the country. I mean, I would want you to do something where you are really, it's coming from an empowerment-based approach. This is not just, sometimes you'll see in a martial arts studio, we're doing some self-defense classes, and they may be good, but they also may not be the approach that you want, because if it's really based on, if it's a male instructor who is used to working with mostly males, women have a different center of gravity. We have different concerns about how we might be attacked. So we teach men's classes, but they're separate, right? We don't want to bring them necessarily together because it's a different approach. Men have to de-escalate. Oftentimes, women have to be able to be ready to fight in a way that they weren't used to. So you want to make sure that they're taking an approach that's really going to be empowering, so that you don't leave that class more afraid than when you started. Because that would be, that's a shame when that happens. I really want everybody to take self-defense, but I want you to do it in a way that makes you leave that class going, oh, yeah, I got some real information, and maybe I heard some harsh statistics, but I got the tools to handle those scenarios so that I don't have to walk in fear, because I want everybody to have more options in their life. I want you to be able to go to the beach at sunset and watch that sun go down and not be worried about what's going to happen when it's darker on the beach and I'm there, right? I want you to have that choice.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So that's all we have time for today. And if you like what we're doing here, please give us a 5-star rating, subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to share Spot the Line with your friends, family, and colleagues. It's especially helpful for us in our rankings if you rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at SpotTheLine, and join our conversation on Facebook, because we're all in this together. Until next time, stay safe, be a good ally to others, and be ready and willing to spot the line.